argument is that hasn't really worked out so well electorally when you look at the record of Conservative Party wins over the course of the 20th century. So surely to goodness, if that was a sound strategy, then you would have seen the Conservatives in power for the majority of years in the of the 20th century as opposed to the Liberals. So, and historically, the Conservative Party does better when it distinguishes its policies and it runs to the right, if I could use that terminology. I hate right-wing, left-wing terminology, but, I'll use it just for the sake of argument. So, yeah, it's I don't know how we got on this subject, Nick, but I would say that I know how we got on this subject. The question of whether or not the Liberal polling numbers are going to fall, and would they have fallen more quickly and more precipitously if, in fact, the Conservative Party was more conservative than it actually is portraying itself as? It's an interesting question. But there's another interesting. It's funny. We did not talk. We have a whole set of subjects because, hey, we're talk show professionals, right, Nick?
That's
so
right.
We have our pre-production meeting. We go over topics. We decide. We don't rehearse. We're very careful about that. We're not scripted. Okay. Some talk shows are more or less scripted. Not us. We like to free associate and interact freely with our listeners and people who are in our chat room. So, having said that, we do have these meetings anyway. We had a list of topics, and this was not one of those topics. Now, there's a reason I'm pointing that out or re-emphasizing that, Nick, and that is because when you said, just as you said, the Bloc Québécois is going to be has announced that they're going to support the Liberals when it comes to passing C-10. So it looks now like that'll pass at least the House of Commons. We'll see how it does in the Senate. But you were asking why. Why do you think that is? You couldn't figure it out. And then it just occurred to me that as I was munching on some snacks here this afternoon and reading the news, I came across a story that I think is starting to get momentum, and that is that the government of Quebec, the provincial government, has decided that they want to see an amendment to the Constitution to officially recognize the province of Quebec as a separate nation, and that the French language, is the sole language of Quebec, or words to that effect. I haven't seen the proposed amendments in front of me, but what was really curious about this story was that apparently the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, also made a statement saying that the province of Quebec did not need the approval of the other provinces, which they may not need for this type of a constitutional amendment. They may not need the approval of other provinces. But then he goes on to say that they also don't need, that the province of Quebec also doesn't need the approval of the federal government. And I don't think that's right. I think for a bilateral constitutional amendment, as it applies to a particular individual province, has to have the agreement of the legislature of that province and the federal legislature, in other words, Parliament. And I'm not aware of any situation where any province can unilaterally alter the federal constitution, even in those areas where it applies exclusively to that province. So now now my mind is thinking, you know where I'm going with this, right? I'm thinking, is there a quid pro quo here? I was astonished when I read that, because I think that's a constitutional no-brainer myself. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. But now I'm starting to think, is there a quid pro quo? I don't know. But isn't it ironic that it would be a Quebec minister at this time when they're talking about amending the Constitution again now to make Quebec an even more quote-unquote distinct society or nation within Canada, and they're bringing this Bill C-10 forward under the auspices of a federal minister from Quebec who happens to be the Canadian Heritage Minister. Go figure. And then to pile irony onto irony, okay, that the justification is to protect Canadian heritage.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think you're probably right, because I saw that article too. I just didn't get a chance to read it, so I wasn't prepared to comment on it. But I'll tell you what, it makes now, from that particular perspective, it makes sense. The Liberals go to the Bloc and say, look, we'll let you do whatever you want with the Constitution. Throw the rules out, do whatever you have to do. You can write your own menu. We'll serve it up and we'll pay the bill. I mean, imagine how this is going to go over in places like, the West, and pick your province. I mean, they've been felt like the black sheep of the family for years, for decades, and now on top of that, the prima donna of the country, Quebec, is asking for not only ever more, but no limits on what they can ask for, because Trudeau's he wanted this bill so badly to pass, he was willing to risk the destruction of the country to get it. Because if this were to pass, look, you and I both know that there's a lot of steam in the kettle, if I can put it that way, about Quebec's Alberta separating and so on, the West deciding to divorce the rest of the country. Now, will it happen tomorrow? Probably not. But the more of this that goes on, the more it fuels that fire. And sooner or later, that kettle's going to boil. So he's risking, maybe not today, but he's risking the unity of the country as a whole for a cheap, to get control over what we hear, think, and how we express ourselves in the social world as we know it today. And I think that's a terrible, terrible situation. It smacks of dare I say, treason, because anything you do to destroy a country, especially if you're the leader of it, could be viewed in that light in certain circles. Now, I don't want to use those terms about my prime minister, and whether I like him or not, he is the prime minister. So when I say my prime minister, don't think I support him in any way at all. I'd never vote for the guy, but he's the guy who's sitting in the big chair. And that's all I'm acknowledging by that. But you got to ask yourself, I've asked this about the province of Newfoundland as well. At what point do you say, what did we get in this for, and what have we gotten out of it? And in the case of Newfoundland, even Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, to a lesser degree BC, what have they gotten out of this confederation that's made putting up with all this garbage worthwhile? Well, for that, I don't have an answer.
No, it's an interesting question, Nick, and to be perfectly fair, I think it's important for us to emphasize that we're just speculating here. I don't have any evidence that there was a discussion or a quid pro quo. It's just mighty curious that all of these things are coming together. The stars happen to be aligning at the same time, as it were. So it never occurred to me that there might be some kind of an agreement, a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and even if there was, I don't think it would be valid. I really don't. I mean, I just don't know how the Prime Minister could possibly take the position, at least without the court saying it, that, as that's his opening position in negotiations. His opening position in negotiating an amendment to the Constitution is, do what you want to do. We don't really care. I mean, yeah, well, it's just a crazy thing. And I'd be saying this if it was a conservative that was saying this the same thing. I don't see eye to eye with Mr. O'Toole on every issue, and I might not even see eye to eye with him on most issues. But certainly, I haven't heard what he has to say about this subject, so it'll be interesting. But
well, something in a way, Joseph, you're right. It'll be interesting, but it's also a fait accompli. I mean, it doesn't matter what he says. If he doesn't have the support of the other parties in the House to defeat this bill, it's going to pass. Yes.
Right. Well, I was talking the constitutional amendment, but
okay.
But
let me loop back to that. Let me loop back to that. He still would need to get the support from Parliament to be able to allow this to happen and give Quebec carte blanche to do what they want with the Constitution. I don't have anything other than circumstantial evidence to point to. I'm just looking at the symptoms of the disease and making a prognosis that why else this is a huge win for the Bloc. So to me, it only makes sense that there's this kind of a trade-off going on behind the scenes. And as much as it galls me that there's even a Bloc Québécois in the House, okay, a party dedicated to the destruction of the country by separating a massive portion of it, they should never be allowed to sit in a federal chamber in the first place. But that aside, that's water long since under the bridge. But to be allowed to write their own check, I'm sorry. That's what other conclusion is a logical one to come to? Not that there isn't one, but I sure would like to know what it is, because until I hear differently, this is the one I'm going with.
Well, the whole thing has become very bizarre. I have to confess to you, I have, sometimes I wonder. It's with everything going on, Nick. The craziness around climate change, the craziness around the whole COVID pandemic. I have to say, I've never seen the situation as, I don't want to say dire. I just bizarre. It's like we're living in a different dimension altogether, and I don't know what to say about it. But again, I would emphasize that we're just pointing out. We're saying there are the dots. We're not necessarily connecting them. We're just saying, look, there are dots out there, and if you want to connect them to our listeners, by all means. But it does strike me as being very strange and even suspicious, if you will, that things have developed the way they have in this respect.
Well, as a very old playwright would say, there is something rotten in Denmark.
And it ain't the cheese?
And it ain't the cheese.
And it ain't the cheese. I used to have a teacher that he was from Israel and a study partner, and he one of his great sayings was he'd look at me and he used to say, but what's it got to do with the price of cheese in China? And
That's a good question.
I used to say to him, no, the price of tea in China. The saying is tea, not cheese. It's get your English sayings correct, or don't try them.
Either that or bastardize them so badly that everybody thinks it's just a joke.
My father used to have a great saying. He used to say, "They're just trying to make him into an escape ghost."
My dad's favorite one was
crazy. I go, no, it's a scapegoat. It's in the Bible. You know this stuff. It's a scapegoat.
Yes, and he did it just to irritate.
Probably.
Just like when one of my grandkids comes in the room and say, "Where's so and so?" "Oh, I sold them. They eat too much."
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, well, look, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the bottom of the hour now, so we're going to take our first break. So if you're listening to the podcast, I'll have to explain that during our next segment to our terrestrial listeners. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you for joining in, and we will catch you the next time. And if you're listening to the live show, stay put. We will be back in a few minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.